Yeah, my name is Ditte Brøgger and I'm from University of Copenhagen. The research I'm presenting here today is a work that I did with my colleague Ditte Brøgger that is unfortunately not here today. But the paper that we have written together is called Returning Home, Migrants, Connections and Visions for Local Development in Rural Nepal. First, I want to introduce the context and clarify three elements related to migration and mobility in a Nepalese context. The work presented in the paper is a part of a research project called Nepal on the Move. The scope of Nepal on the Move is to focus on mobility in Nepal, a country in transition through the studies of conflict, migration and stability. A significant part of post-conflict Nepal's transition is mobility. The majority of the population was, until the 90s, living in rural areas. Since then, Nepal has experienced a redistribution of the population from rural to urban areas with a very accelerating rate. The increase in both international migration and internal rural-urban migration is leading to new opportunities, but also to challenges from Nepal. I think in Nepal, as in many other places around the world, there is a migration hierarchy. Some destinations are more prestigious than other destinations and more popular. But ultimately, I think in Nepal, as in many other places in the world, the factor who determines where people can move or migrate to is access to economic and to social capital. So the Nepalese upper class will be more likely to be the international migrants. They acquire study visas or green cards, and they are able to go and to move to, for example, US or to Europe. And to a lesser degree is the middle class able to become international migrants in the US and Europe. Only if they are very lucky they will obtain a visa or green card. A larger number of the extensive middle class in Nepal are going abroad as labor migrants to, for example, Malaysia and Qatar. The majority of the lower class is not at all able to move, and if they are, they will maybe move to the nearby urban areas where they live in informal settlement and be engaged in the informal sector. But in my study, I have worked with another part of the middle class. And I think actually that is the majority of the mobile part of the middle class. And they are moving towards urban centers in Nepal. They are actually internal migrants. They are moving to urban areas to get access to better facilities and especially to get access to education. Just a few words about what migration is in a Nepalese perspective, because the word for migration in Nepali is basai sarai, which actually literally means settlement transfer. And I think the word basai sarai is both a very problematic but also interesting term. First of all, I think it's problematic because settlement transfer is legal registered migration. It requires that the migrant cut formal ties to the place of origin and register fully and legally in the new place. And this is actually a really rare kind of migration in Nepal. People in Nepal simply wish to belong to their place of origin, unless there are very apparent and good reasons for them to register in a new place. And also only if they have the formal requirements to register in a new place, which is often linked to things such as ownership or title of land. So practically this means, basai sarai, that very few people or people on the move are actually counted as migrants in a Nepalese context. They are not counted in the census as migrant. And furthermore, people, they don't see them as migrants. They are registered only as temporary absent in the place of origin, or they are even registered or unregistered. And it is actually very common that a lot of people are living the whole life or most of their life in this way, unregistered or wrongly registered. Problematic, yes, of course, but I think also very interesting, because it's actually challenged the argument that migration is a timely finalized movement from A to B. and it shows that people are not just settled in one place and then they settle in a new place. They continue to be more in between places, both in their lifelong embodied movement, but also in their behavioral logic and in their mental activities. And furthermore, as I will show in the following analysis, the migrant have not formally or emotionally or maybe not relationally left the place of origin. In the following, I will, however, classify these people on the move as migrants to avoid misunderstandings. To give an insight in how I have studied the connections in Nepal, I will say a few words about my methodology. The starting point of my study has been a village community in the eastern part of Nepal. It is not connected with roads, but it's not remote in a Nepalese understanding. The village is located in a relatively fertile part of the eastern highlands, and the rural living standards must be considered as above average. Part of the data I collected was mapped that I drew together with the villages. Initially, I conducted interviews in 50 households, and in each interview, I drew 2 maps, and here are 2 examples. So one map showed the respondent's mobility patterns, places he or she had lived, visited. It showed the purpose and the length of the stay, including brief information about the respondent's continuous attachment to that place. And the second map showed the respondent's connections to other places. Particularly, it will show where family members and relatives are currently residing. The 50 pairs of connection maps created the foundation for my study, but to get a better understanding of the generology of the connection, I continued to make interviews with the villagers and with the returned migrants who come back to the village visiting during major festival. And also I went to some of the connected places and made interviews to the migrant who stayed there. These studies, they made apparent various types of patterns of weak and very strong ties connecting the village to places beyond. But the connections to the capital Kathmandu stood out especially as very interesting, especially the connections that the parents they had to the capital through their children who were in Kathmandu for educational purposes. And the connected educational migrants were especially, I think, interesting because they were learning from the educational programs they were engaged in, but they were also, through the engagement in the society, learning from the society in a more broader sense. And they were in many ways on the move in their life, in their understanding, and in their transformation, and in the knowledge they acquired. So they are a form of they symbolize the transformation in Nepal that the Nepal on the Move project also tries to emphasize. And even though also these educational migrants, even though they have lived in Kathmandu for many years, they consider still their parents' home in the village as their own home. So I think this is why I've chosen that this is the part of my study that I will present here today. It's also what my paper is mainly focusing on. This is these 16 educational migrants living in Kathmandu. I'll briefly present the 4 theoretical pillars inspiring and composing my research framework for this study. So in my work and with my understanding of connections, understanding of multi-locality and the construction of not only trans-local connection, but also multi-local links between various places has been a central driver and inspiration for my work. Together with the scholarly focus on the potentials of non-economic remittances and the focus on flows of experiences, knowledge, and habits to families and the home communities. But at the same time, my research is voiced against the in remittances as I work with flows as multidirectional. Economic and social remittances are, of course, closely related and flows together through the same channels. but I think not always from A to B or back from B to A, but I think the values of capital are circulated in networks of people in various places. So finally, the why, I think, is very essential in my research, the behavioral logic behind moving, connecting, remitting, and returning. So understanding the logic behind remittances behavior as embedded in wider social systems of embodied practice has been guiding my research in Nepal. So to present my analysis of the connections from the point of view of the migrants, I will here today focus on 3 analytical aspects. The emotional ties, dependency, and aspirations. And if I have the time, I will also include some reflections on how it is seen from a village perspective. This quote here is an example of how the educational migrants declare their emotions, their love, and their passions for the birthplace. I feel connected. When I returned 2 days ago, I left my son to play on the ground. I was reminded of how I had played in this place like him. I wanted him to feel the love of this place and let him learn how his father grew up. I think an apparent finding was that the feelings of attachment was common among all the migrants. Migrants are simultaneously attached and oriented to more than one place. They build somehow of a dual identity as they feel connected to a different place than the place where they live. It was common that the migrants actually expressed a stronger feeling and had a stronger tie to their birthplace, which was affecting their feeling of belonging to their current living place. In this case, the capital, Kathmandu. And some of them have lived in the capital for more than 10 years. Here we have to remember the Basai Sarai again. They were only registered in the village and were therefore emotionally and formally still citizens of the village. I found that the emotional ties between migrants and their homes are important aspects of their behavioral logics. But the emotional ties did not come out of only feelings. I found that the feelings were closely linked to the dependency. Here's a quote that illustrates a common parent-migrant mutual dependency relation. I depend on my parents. They have had to take loans, and the loans are increasing. If we can't earn well enough in the future, it will be a very big problem. They have to trust in us. So the dependency during the study keep obviously the migrants in connection to home, but the parents expect something in return for their investment, and that is a part of the culture. None of the migrants were doubting this. But in many cases, they were not exactly sure what was expected, but sure that not living up to these expectations would be a problem. And by this, I found that the social and emotional aspects of staying connected are closely related to the flows of economic and material resources. Furthermore, an interest in perceiving their entitlement to the family property as an opportunity to inherit did also seem important. However, it was to a lesser degree directly expressed by the migrants. The emotional ties and dependency translates into the migration's aspirations and future plans for their role in the home village. And one migrant said, "Due to the process of globalization, the world has changed a lot. I want to be a change maker for my home. I will bring this change to come to my home place." So migrants experience that they have changed since they have left the village. They have had a chance to change. They develop a strong image of themselves as change agents or agents of change. And educational migrants in Kathmandu express a clear vision to contribute to local development. And several of them have already been engaged in development, both individually or collectively. When they talk about it, they explain it with a strong feeling and belonging to the home place, but also driven by expectations from their family and their rural community. They perform this role from a remote position or doing visits, because none of them actually aspire to return and settle in the village, as they have realized that the changed lifestyle does not fit in with the rural lifestyle. Before I come to my conclusion, I will now include a few reflections of how the rural community perceive these connections. Again, I will start with a quote, and this time it's from a father who is a local teacher. He expressed one of the roles of the migrants like this. They share new things, they discuss their education and what they have learned. For example, now my son is here and he is teaching my class instead of me. Education and more broadly the insight and the worldview migrants have obtained in Kathmandu makes the migrants' connections with their home important. There are expectations to them and to the role that they can come to play in the village. The migrants get a position and as an extension of the rural community into the capital, where access to different resources, including knowledge, is easily accessible, and they are a resource for the local community. Another aspect is that the migrants are important assets of prestige for their parents. For parents, it would be a failure if they return to the village, and for the community, it will maybe be a loss of a connection to the outside world. From this, I will come with some concluding remarks to the findings in my study of the potentials of the connections for local development. The connections to places of origin is for the Nepalese migrants embedded in the vocabulary related to normal and legal understandings of migration as Basai the settlement transfer. And migrants' connections are based on feelings of dependency and create aspiration among migrants to engage in the local development in the place that is legally and emotionally still their home. Return migration is not preferred as rural areas actually benefit from the translocal connections, and the migrants function as an extension of the community and give access to resources from beyond the place. So my research showed that an understanding of connection can lead to an understanding of potentials for internal migrants' engagement in rural development. However, I think I should say that the actual benefit of these connections and the related conflict of equal distribution and reproduction of the local power geometry has not been considered in this study, but must be further assessed, as there is a huge risk that the distribution of the benefits from the educational migrants from these connections will reproduce social status and a social hierarchy.